Welcome to the Mentor Studio, where today's thought leaders and leading entrepreneurs inspire and bring real-world ideas that help you take your career to levels you've only dreamed of. Now buckle in. Here's your host, Michael Silvers.
Hi, everyone. This is Michael Silvers with the Mentor Studio. I wanted to thank you for being on today. This is a really special call because two of my mentors are going to be interviewing each other and really just giving you a tremendous amount of information. And that's exciting for me. So I'm going to take as many notes as all of you out there and really remember how to use this. Apply it today. And don't wait. And that's all I'm going to say. Everybody knows me already. So without any further ado, so a lot of you know who she is already, but Mary Glorfield was the executive vice president for Tony Robbins for 18 years. She did 4 million miles with Tony, 3 million participants, 82 countries. It makes me look like I'm brand new in the industry. And she obviously then went on to do the same thing with T. Harv Eker and put on many of the major events in the U.S. and is still producing them today. There's no one who's done in this industry what Mary has done. I'm going to turn this over to Mary Glorfield.
Thanks, Michael. Well, I'm excited to share this speaker with you, and some of you already know him, but I'm really, really excited to have Keith Cunningham here today. I met Keith and his wife, Sandy, about 18 years ago in Australia, and I was immediately impressed with Keith and his content. And Sandy is CEO of their company, Keys to the Vault, and a big part of the company's success. And I know Keith would agree with that. I have been blessed to be able to put Keith on many stages all over the world and just extremely excited that we've become friends over those years. Keith is a seasoned entrepreneur, internationally known speaker, and acclaimed author. Keith is regarded as the world's foremost authority on business mastery. He has taught critical business skills, mentored and coached thousands of top executives and entrepreneurs around the world. He has appeared on stage with industry giants such as T. Harv Eker, which many of you know, Brian Tracy, Robert Kiyosaki, and Tony Robbins, just to name a few. Keith is an expert at helping business owners turning fledgling businesses into highly profitable companies with explosive growth. Keith speaks at Tony Robbins Business Mastery, and I can tell you that Keith is the only speaker I have observed where Tony has felt comfortable leaving the room and even leaving the city and turning the stage over to Keith. Tony has said, "I would move heaven and earth to work with Keith. You are not going to get this kind of coaching for less than $100,000 a day." And that's a quote. Keith, welcome. So excited to have you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mary. Thank you. I'm so glad to be here, and I appreciate the opportunity.
So I have a couple of questions for you, and then we're going to open it up for questions from everybody else. I think you would agree we're kind of in an unprecedented time in our history. Do you have any specific advice on how people can grow their businesses, or maybe even how to thrive or survive in this time?
I think we are in an unprecedented event, but crisis is not unprecedented. In my lifetime, I've been through 4 major unprecedented crises that each had different consequences and ripple effects, and they impacted different parts of the economy and different businesses in different ways. I love what Warren Buffett has said. Warren Buffett said, "Bad economies do not cause businesses to fail. They expose the weak ones." And the weak ones are almost always offense only. No defense, no dry powder, no safety net, no plan B. If you live on the south coast of Florida, you know there's going to be hurricanes. And the key is, can you build a house that can withstand a hurricane? And what that really means is that my experience is that most business owners, most entrepreneurs play only offense. They have no defense. And yet, if you look at championship teams, you'll find that the team with the best defense almost always wins. You look back at the last 15 or 20 Super Bowls, the last 15 or 20 NBA championships. And over again, 98% of the time, you're going to find the team with the best defense wins the championship. Look no further than the Super Bowl this last year. You had Kansas City and Tampa Bay. Kansas City's got the hottest quarterback in the league. I mean, he is a racehorse. And Tampa Bay has this old, withering, tired quarterback. But Tampa Bay happened to have a great defense. Look at the NBA championship. Phoenix Suns, Milwaukee Bucks. Phoenix Suns had the hot offense. Milwaukee Bucks had one of the best defenses in the league. The key is, can we build a company or a business that can withstand future hurricanes? And I'll say this. I think now that we've had a lockdown and we've been through the last 18 months, it wouldn't surprise me a bit if there were future lockdowns. In fact, what would surprise me is if this is the last lockdown that ever happens in my lifetime. Not from COVID-19, not from the Delta variant. I'm not talking about this particular crisis. 5 years from now, 8 years from now, 3 years from now, there will be some other thing that happens. And now that we've broken the dam of having lockdowns, we'll have more. I got to tell you a real quick story. Lee Iacocca, who in 1979 was the CEO of Ford Motor Company, and he got fired by Henry Ford II. So, there's not a lot of job opportunities after you've been fired as the CEO of a major automobile company. It just so happened that Chrysler was going through a crisis and needed a CEO, so Lee Iacocca took the job. Chrysler is in giant financial doo-doo. They've got a huge mess, and nobody will loan them any money. They're short $1 billion in 1979 to stay alive, and the lender of last resort was the federal government. So Lee Iacocca flew to Washington, D.C., and had a meeting with 12 senators and said to them, Chrysler is going to go broke unless the federal government bails us out. And the federal government said, no, thank you. We've never done that. We will never do that. That is not an option. 2 weeks later, Lee Iacocca met with the same group of senators and said this, you're going to write a check. The only question is how big. If Chrysler goes broke, your check will be $2 billion to pay for all of the unemployment, and it'll be $1 billion if you decide to bail us out. So in 1979, the federal government, for the first time, bailed out a private company. You and I collectively don't have enough fingers and toes to count the number of times that the federal government has bailed out a company since then. So the idea is that once a precedent has been set, there'll be more of the same thing. And the key to me is, in this crisis, what are the lessons that you learned about building a business that can withstand a hurricane? I'm not talking about whether or not you lose a couple shingles. I'm talking about whether or not it blows the house down. And the problem is that a house that can withstand a hurricane versus a house that cannot withstand a hurricane is indistinguishable until after the hurricane. What we should be doing is building businesses that can withstand a hurricane, meaning we've got a safety net, we've got dry powder, we've got some defense, which most people don't have.
Thank you, Keith. Wow. I'm not sure I agree with you about Tom Brady, however, but since I am now Tampa Bay. Keith, you have a saying, not all progress is measured by ground gain. Sometimes progress is measured by losses avoided. Can you elaborate on that?
Oh, this is my favorite question to ask people. So I'm asking you, if I gave you the opportunity to unwind any 3 financial decisions you've ever made, how much money would you have right now? You don't have to tell me. You just think about that. And the truth is, for most of us, Had we just avoided one or two dumb things, we could be far more financially well off than we currently are. So if I was going to put this on a bumper sticker, I would say the key to getting rich is to avoid doing stupid things. That's the key. I don't need to do more smart things. I need to do fewer stupid things. And stupid things have at their root one of three things. There's only three things in my experience when I look back at my own life that have caused my dumb tax. This is a tax I have to pay every time I do something dumb. And the three things are excessive optimism, unexamined assumptions, and number three, ignored risk. And when I look back at the dumb taxes I've paid, one, if not all of those three things is obvious. Markets move in cycles, and there are times that you can harvest, and there are times that no matter how much you want to plant, it's not a time to plant, it's a time to tread water. So there's times to harvest and times to tread water. And sometimes when the markets are moving away from us and we tread water, the primary goal should not be making more money. Sometimes the primary goal is to avoid doing something stupid, avoid a loss. And so progress sometimes is measured by losses avoided. If we can avoid doing dumb things, then all of us would be better off not only financially, but with our lives. And what sabotages us is one of three things: excessive optimism, unexamined assumptions, and ignored risk.
You're so smart, Chief. And you have the ability to meet and rub elbows with the rich and the famous and the CEOs and the big titans in the world. What advice have you received, either professionally or personally?
The best advice I ever got in my whole life came 30 years ago after I had paid an enormous dumb tax that cost me all my money, resulted in a bankruptcy. I went from being very, very rich to very, very poor in a very short period of time. It was in the real estate business in the 1980s. And as a result of that huge dumb tax that caused me to have to do an entire reset on my life, one of the teachers I had was not a CEO, not somebody that's rich and famous, but rather a Hindu guru. And the Hindu guru that I was listening to said to me one time, "Keith, hell on earth would be to meet the man you could have been." And when I heard that, the hair on the back of my neck stood up. It's a thought that resonated with me, and I still literally every day think about that saying. It would be horrible to meet the person I could have been. I want to be able to meet the man I could have been. I want to be able to look him in the eyeball, and I want to be able to say, "I know you because I am you." And what that requires for me is a commitment to mastery, a commitment to learning, a commitment to improving, a commitment to growth. And that's become fundamental to my life. It changed my life, and I would say it's the best advice I ever got.
That is such great advice. I love that. What's the really big risk that you've taken in business? The one big risk, or maybe the first risk you took?
I've taken calculated risk, and I've taken blind risk. A calculated risk, the very first one was as I was getting out of graduate school, and I had an opportunity to work with a bunch of major U.S. companies. And I also had an opportunity to work with a smallish business that was in its infancy. The industry was in its infancy. But the two principals of that business were both very, very successful, but they couldn't pay me a lot of money. And so my decision was, did I go with the smaller business where I had two mentors, both very successful, and was I willing to forego the immediate gratification of a lot of upfront money and instead go for the delayed gratification of money, but in exchange, have two very, very smart people be my mentor? And it was a very calculated risk. I left a lot of money on the table for several years by making the choice to go with the smaller company and take a little less money. My biggest blind risk was the 1980s, and I was, by this time, been in business for 15, 20 years, and I had made a tremendous amount of money very, very fast. And the more I made, the more certain I was that my success was a result of my brilliance and my astounding business acumen. I kept going all in when I should have raked some chips. I was blind to the risk. I love what Bill Gates said on this. Bill Gates said, the problem with success is that it lulls smart people into believing they know what they're doing. And that's what happened to me. I was astonishingly successful. I thought it meant that I was probably really good at it. And it turns out I got lucky. And I confused my luck for skill, and as a result, made a catastrophic mistake. That's probably the biggest risk, financial risk I ever took, but it was a stupid risk, and it's a risk that I have learned some very valuable lessons from. I promise you I will never make that mistake again. There's a great story that I have to tell real quick, Mary. I was invited to speak in Ireland about 7 or 8 years ago, and the promoter of the event asked me the day before the event to go on to a live radio station interview and help promote the event, which was going to happen the next day. I agreed to do it. I was happy to do it. So I showed up at the radio station ready for the interview, and the disc jockey motions me into the studio, and we're on a commercial break, and the disc jockey says, you know, Keith, I know about you. I've read about you. I know your background. Is there anything you don't want me to talk about? And I said, yeah, look, don't ask me how it feels to lose $100 million. I said, I'm going to tell you right now, it feels truly horrible. And it's a bad question, so don't ask me about that. And he said, okay, no problem. So he flicks on the little switch. Now we're live with the audience. And he says to the studio audience, he said, I'm sitting here with Keith Cunningham, the man who lost $100 million. Keith, how does it feel to lose $100 million? So now I'm live on this call, and you know, obviously I'm irritated. I'd been set up, and I looked at him and I said, you know what? Life to me is kind of like a university. And universities have courses, and life has courses. I just took a course in the University of Life, and the tuition was $100 million. Now, let me tell you two things about this course. Number one, not very many people get to take it. It's kind of expensive. Number two, the question is not, how does it feel to have spent $100 million? The question is, did I get my money's worth? And the answer to that question is yes, which is why I keep a log of lessons learned. I think it's one thing to take a risk. I think it's another thing to learn the lesson. And my experience is that most people fail to learn the lesson, and so they get to repeat the course.
That I had not heard that story, Keith. That's great. They set you up every time. They
do. Mary, don't set me up, okay? I'm going to tell you right now, it's not fun to lose $100 million.
God. Well, I'd like to learn that lesson. So, Keith, I know both you and Sandy are extremely disciplined, and there's so many things that I've learned from you and Sandy. And one of the things that's really made a difference, that's helped me make decisions in my life, and very thoughtful decisions. And it's something that you talk about is the thinking chair, the thinking pen, the thinking journal. Can you talk about that process?
So there's a book that was written 80 years ago. It sold 75 million copies. It's published in 35 different languages. All of you have heard of this book. Many of you have this book on your bookshelf. A few of you have actually read it. The name of the book is Think and Grow Rich. The name of the book is not Follow Your Passion and Grow Rich. The name of the book is not Dim the Lights, Light the Incense, Sing Kumbaya, and a sack full of money is going to fall on your head. That's not the name of the book. It's Think. And it turns out that business is an intellectual sport. Investing is an intellectual sport. Money is an intellectual sport. I'm great with people following their passion, but if your passion is going to be financially successful, then the business end of the stick is going to be critical. And my experience is, sadly, that most entrepreneurs and business owners spend the vast majority of their time reacting to the crisis du jour, playing whack-a-mole, hand-cranking their business. And the reason is because they're using their emotions, their gut, and their glands instead of their brain. The key is to design and architect two things: structure and leverage. Opportunity without structure is chaos. The price for entrepreneurial success is structure. And unless you intend to hand crank as opposed to build a machine, then you're going to need some leverage. And it turns out that designing and planning and architecting requires thinking as opposed to reacting. If I ask you to look at your calendar, look at your day timer, however you keep your calendar, take a look at the last 12 months and find one 30-minute thinking time session where you sat down to actually think about a problem or an obstacle or an opportunity. And when I challenge most people with this, most people can't find one 30-minute session in the last 12 months where they closed the door, they turned off their phones, they turned off their computers, and they sat with a journal and a pen with a question. Great thinking always starts with a question. The quality of your thinking time will be dictated by the quality of the question that you're going to think about. And if you don't have a question to think about, I promise you, when you sit down to think, you'll take a nap without a question. So the key is designing a very robust question and then shutting off all distractions or possible distractions for 30 to 45 minutes and keep an empty dot on your page. So every time you write something as a possible answer, put a dot on the page. Right below that answer, write another possible answer, another possible thought, another idea, and put a dot. Always have an empty dot, because that tells your brain, oh, there must be at least one more thing. This idea of thinking time is something that I learned 35, almost 40 years ago now, from probably one of the smartest people I've ever met. And he was very disciplined about setting aside regular thinking time. And when I learned it, I forgot to use it for the first 8 or 9 years. And after I learned it, and did some stupid things, and then I started using it, and my life has radically changed as a result of only 2 to 3 thinking time sessions a week with a very powerful question. So a question might be, what don't I see? What don't I see? And what you and I can't see is our assumptions. A powerful question would be, how would I have to run my business so that customers would say I'd have to be crazy to go someplace else? A powerful question might be, how would I have to run my business? How would I run my business if 100% of my future clients were by referral only? A powerful question might be, how big would my business be if I still had every customer that ever tried me? I'm looking for questions that cause me to think. And when I'm in a thinking time, I'm not trying to come up with the best answer. I'm trying to come up with a lot of different possibilities. And then once the thinking time is over, I'll cull and figure out which ones of those are maybe the high value ideas. Somebody said to me one time, they said, Keith, how do you have a great idea? And I said, well, have a lot of ideas and pick the best one. That's what thinking time is designed to do. It's designed to help you either generate ideas or get clarity on the obstacle that's in the way. I love what Marcus Aurelius said. Marcus Aurelius said, what's in the way is the way. I happen to agree with that. Whatever the obstacle is that's in the way is the way. And what I need to do more often than not in my thinking time is get clarity on the obstacle that's in the way. And once I have clarity on that, I can begin to design possibilities, solutions, opportunities that will help me move the needle from where I am to what I want. I have a thinking time chair, and the only time I sit in it is when I'm going to think. I have a thinking time pen and a thinking time journal. I don't think on a computer because there's too many distractions. I have journals. And over the course of the last 30-something years, I've developed well over 700 questions that I use for various thinking time topics. And in my most recent book, The Road Less Stupid, you'll find 704 of those questions. I think you'll like it. I've told people, you can take away everything I have, take away all my money, all my skills, and leave me only thinking time. And I'll figure out how to get it back. But thinking time is that powerful.
That's so great. I love that. Love that. Keith, you've had so much success in your life, both personally and professionally. What's next for you?
Success is getting what you want. Fulfillment is giving what you got. I am in a fulfillment stage of my life. I'm incredibly grateful for the success and the opportunities that we have been given, some of which, Mary, you were at the genesis of, which we're deeply appreciative. But the success at this point is less important. I certainly don't want to lose anything, but I'm in a fulfillment stage, and this is my way to have fulfillment is with teaching and with mentoring and advising and coaching business owners and leadership teams and helping them avoid doing dumb things.
That's beautiful. Well, you've certainly been one of my number one mentors for sure, and I so appreciate that. Keith, I love the story about your first date with Sandy. Would you mind sharing that story with us? Because I think there's so many great lessons in there for both men and women.
It's my favorite story. In the mid-1980s, at the height of my financial success at the time, I was told that I had a meeting, and I looked at my day timer, and there was no meeting on my day timer. And my secretary, administrative assistant, apologized and said she had forgot to put the meeting on my calendar. And I asked who the meeting was with, and the meeting was with somebody that owned a magazine, and they wanted to sell me advertising, which I did not need. And the meeting happened. I bought some advertising, even though I didn't need it, because the woman who was calling on me was incredibly attractive. She was beautiful. In fact, the first thing I said to her, but when she walked into my office, the first thing I said to her is, "I'm not sure what you're selling, but I'm buying all of it. You are by far the prettiest woman I've ever seen." So right about that time, the real estate market started to cool off. And now fast forward 15 years, I've gone broke. I've remade my financial success. All that's handled. I have been single 15 years later. I've been single about 9 years by then. And I was at a party, and this friend of mine that I hadn't seen in a long time asked me what I was doing, and for my career, my business, and then he said, "Are you dating anyone? Are you married?" And I said, "No, I haven't remarried. I've been single. I'm not dating anyone right now." And he said, "Well, do you know Sandy?" And Sandy was the one that was selling me advertising 15 years before that I hadn't seen in 15 years. And I went, "Oh my gosh, is Sandy still in Austin? I haven't thought of her. I haven't seen her. I'd love to see her." And this guy gave me her number. I called her on the phone. I actually left the party early, called her on the phone and asked her to go to dinner, which she reluctantly agreed to. And so we met at the restaurant. This will show you how bad this was. This got off to a horrible start because she wouldn't even let me come pick her up, right? We had to meet at the restaurant. So we meet at the restaurant. I thought I said, "Let's have dinner at 7:30. She said, "How about if I meet you there at 6:30? I'm thinking, oh my gosh, this is going horrible. So we sit down about 7 o'clock, and we have our first date. This is probably the greatest first date that for sure I've ever had. It could be the greatest first date in the history of mankind. We laughed, we talked, we were vulnerable. We talked about our past and our mistakes and the future, and this thing is going terrifically well. And at 10 o'clock that night, I looked at Sandy and I said, this is our first date. I looked at Sandy and I said, "I'm about to ask you a question I've never asked another woman in my whole life." And she said, "Okay, what is it?" I said, "What do you want?" And she said, "What do you mean?" I said, "What do you want in a man? What do you want in a relationship?" She said, "Oh, that's easy. I want to be loved and adored." I called our waiter over to the table and I said, bring me a pen and a piece of paper. And I wrote down January the 4th, 2001, Sandy, loved and adored. I said, now, Sandy, tell me every single thing that needs to happen for you to feel loved and adored. The woman talked for an hour and a half. It was unbelievable. This list kept going. I'm writing it down, every single thing. She finally, at one point during this long monologue, high maintenance, this woman is high maintenance, right? So at some point she said, and I want a note every day. I looked at her and I said, you must be kidding me. A note every day. My God, that's a lot of pressure every day. And I literally was struggling to write it down. And I looked at her and I said, Sandy, what if I forget? And she said, oh, that's not a problem. I'll remind you. And she does. I mean, it'll be like 3 o'clock in the afternoon and I'll get a little text that says, did the mailman break his leg? Or, you know, what happened to my mailman? And I go, oh, shit. And I get busy and I write her a little note. Sometimes the notes rhyme. Sometimes they're romantic. Sometimes they're short. Sometimes my notes are nasty because she didn't tell me what kind of note. But she gets a note every day. The key to the woman's heart was a note every day. I could have spent 100 years trying to figure that out, which is how I had spent the majority of my time in my prior relationships, is I'm busy trying to give somebody what I want to give them instead of what they want. And Sandy's very smart. At the end of that, she said, and so that's it. And she said, and I reserve the right to add additional items to the list should I think of more, which she has. And she said, give me your pen and your piece of paper. And she said, what do you want? And I said, I want to create spectacular. That's what I want. That's my word, is spectacular. And she said, all right, well, tell me exactly what needs to happen. And I told her all three things. There's only three. I told her all three things, and that's what we've been about. We've been about find out what they want, go and get it, give it to them. Find out what they want, go and get it, and give it to them. And the mistake we make as business owners, the mistake we make in our relationships is we start with number two. We go and get it, and then we got to figure out how to jam it down their throats instead of simply asking, what do you want? Let me go and get it, and let me give it to you. And to me, that's a secret sauce that we have, that Sandy and I have, and it's a secret sauce that is at the core of all of our business interests over the last 35 or 40 years. That the market really doesn't care what you got or how passionate you are about what you're doing. The market wants a problem solved. The market has two things: a gain it wants to get or a pain it wants to avoid. Find out what they want, go and get it, and give it to them.
Thank you so much, Keith. I admire your relationship, your and Sandy's relationship. It's really an example of the kind of relationship I would want. And so it's amazing. And you are brilliant, probably the most brilliant person I know. So thank you. Thank you for sharing. And if you have a couple minutes, could we open it up for some questions?
I do.
Yeah. And before we move to the questions, I just wanted to thank everybody for being on the Mentor Studio and listening. We know your time's important, and this was really impactful because, Keith, you gave us things to do immediately and how to look at things in a different way. Because sometimes we don't see it until we see it. And you gave us a way just to start seeing it. So I really appreciate that. So we're going to move to the next session. If for those in the podcast, if you want to know more about the Mentor Studio, you can just go to thementorsstudio.com. We thank you for being with us today.
We're honored that you invested time with us today at the Mentor Studio. Now, don't be greedy. Share this knowledge bomb with all your dope peeps on Facebook, Instagram, and Snapchat. Actually, we'll even pay you to do it. To get the deets, please check out thementorsstudio.com.